Good morning. My name is George, and we have about 300 people in the room, so I thought we start with a quick poll. Can I see a raise of hands for those who drove here or took a taxi? A bunch. Anybody ride a bike or walk? Public transit? Oof. Well, as it turns out, that poll actually reflects much of the landscape for transportation options across the US and many cities. And those little individual decisions you make as people have profound effects on how we plan and organize our cities, and even affect things about where you live. Back in 2008, I was fortunate enough to join the Chicago Transit Authority as their brand new lead designer, a newly created job and title. I was bringing my user-centered design approach to try and see if we can design specific services for the public, and in my particular case, designing a bus. Now, you might be wondering why it took until 2008 for this newly created role to exist. Surely you would think the CTA would have users at the center of what they do every day. Actually, turns out that other things take precedent. Taking their buses and trains, which is a sort of organizational and functional and practically a logistical nightmare of thousands of these vehicles, this fleet, is a staggering amount of work, and it's amazing that they get to do it every day. But the operations and efficiency of what they do is very much the forefront, and it sort of trumps user experience every time. Now, this quote here, this is a joke. I'm pretty sure it was a joke. But a colleague of mine said one day to me, just in passing, you know, we'd have a great service if it wasn't for all these people, as though the public involved in the public service that we were doing was somehow getting in the way of all the operations and efficiency. So yeah, technically, yes. If you just took everybody out, we would have buses on time every single day. Bam, 100% hit rate. But I think we may have missed the point a little. So actually, what we realize is that the logistics of operations is so paramount that really the CTA is more akin to FedEx than necessarily the Four Seasons. So when I'm there, I'm sort of going about my business trying to design things. For 11 months, I got to do that job with great honor to be part of the city. And unfortunately, the leadership at the time changed also within those 11 months. So the political protection that I had in this newly created role also went with it. People stopped returning my calls. Those emails went unanswered. It felt a little bit like organ rejection. So I was unceremoniously given the boot after 11 months. Thankfully, I found myself a new home. I'm now a tenure-track professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I teach design to my grad and undergrad students about the power of design on a citywide scale. Now, the reason why I took the job in the first place was to try and leverage the 7-odd years I had of being a user-centered designer at IDEO and apply them to a really complex set of issues at the city. Now, in many ways, what I realized is that if I have a meaningful contribution to make, and I don't take that opportunity, I forfeit my right to whine about it. I'd like to remind you, all of you, that you have the same responsibility. If you can make a contribution but don't, you can't whine. Sorry. So for me, I thought that was like an inherent responsibility. And sort of trying to get myself up to the present day now, I now have co-founded a company called Greater Good Studio, and we have one simple principle. We use design methods to solve for social problems. As opposed to what we used to do in our previous lives, designing for business problems, we think that these social problems are slightly more meaningful, important, perhaps have more impact. And we recognize that massive change actually is only made up of little thousands of little tiny changes along the way. So when we were starting to found Greater Good and sort of now being on the outside, we kept asking ourselves, how can we actually help? This itch, as it were, of trying to help the city and public service remained unscratched, and I thought perhaps maybe we can do it from the outside now. But what we realized is also in observing and seeing firsthand what it's like to work at CTA, we started to see this sort of adversarial tension that exists between public service and the public. The kinds of things that happen right now where CTA might engage with the public might be through a town hall meeting. Has anyone ever been to one of those things? You end up with a lot of fringe element coming out and a lot of complaining. It's almost like they ask people to complain at them, and then they wonder why people are upset. So they're asking these kinds of complaining type of questions. So what we realized is that before we even try to design any new tools for public transit, what we really need to do is design a new model for public engagement. We thought that actually has to happen first before we do the second part. And for us, we call this Designing Chicago. That's the title of our project. Now, has anyone heard this term crowdsourced design? No? Okay, good. Thank you. Has anyone actually taken part in something like that? Maybe? In my mind, as a designer, I kept wondering, what does this term mean? And does it have any role for me now that I'm a professionally trained designer? How does it sort of fit alongside of this idea of there being a crowd of people? In my mind, whenever I thought about crowdsourced design, I kept thinking that there was this angry mob of people with Sharpies and Post-it notes just rampaging through the streets, designing things willy-nilly. And it was there was just a lot of activity, but not necessarily a lot of productivity. So I kept wondering, how do I fit in with this new emergent world? How can we turn this perhaps into a little more productivity as opposed to just a lot of random activity? So I have a handy framework here for you. This is a 2x2. You might see across the horizontal axis we have quantity of people, and the vertical axis we have quality of understanding. Now, the CTA and many large organizations, local government in particular, like to use these techniques in this bottom right corner: surveys, town hall meetings, and focus groups. What we have typically is lots and lots of people, but with typically kind of fairly shallow understanding of what actually is happening in the real world. This bottom left is more what you would say is gut intuition. A sample size of one asking themselves, what would I do in this situation? Up in this top left-hand corner, as a designer and as a design researcher, we pay a lot of attention to this technique we call ethnographic research. We like to look at and observe users in context and try to understand what's really happening on the day-to-day as opposed to what people say they're doing. What they actually do in terms of behavior is very important to study. Now, what we realize is that there's a missing box up here, the top right corner. How do we get lots of understanding and a lot of people? How do we fill that box in the top right corner? It's not rhetorical. I'm actually asking, does anybody know how to? Fine, okay. So we wondered, how do we do this? How are we going to fill that top right corner? And we kept thinking, like, how do we turn that angry mob into something actually productive? How do we get this top right? So we thought, we have a secret weapon, actually. The secret weapon is teaching. Is anyone a teacher in the room? Fantastic, this is great. You're my people. So with teachers, what you find is that there is a transformative experience in education where if you give enough guidance, enough time, and patience with your students, you can actually have both sides be transformed and can do better for the world. So what we started to realize is that if we reframed the problem around having this angry mob, as it were, but started to treat them as students, we started to realize, oh, we can start to think of the whole city as a classroom. If you do it that way, then everybody can play. No matter who you are, you can have a meaningful contribution to our project if we'd only asked. So thinking about it in terms of that way actually reframed the entire problem, that it didn't become so scary. So instead of calling it crowdsourced, we started to coin a new term. We call it a public design team. So the outcome of our project is to try and design a mobile app for transit riders to help them make better decisions about what they do alongside the existing tools and apps that they have already. It would be better than Google Maps. It would be better than anything on the market because it's designed for users by the public themselves. Very different right now. A lot of technologies and apps are traditionally built right now around what can you do, not what should we do. And because we're starting with users first, not technology, we think we've made a fundamental shift. So we said we're going to do this crazy project. My wife and I convinced ourselves, oh, this is going to be awesome. And we told everybody we knew, seriously everybody, all our peers, all our professional counterparts, all our partners, every friend we had in town, we said, we're going to do this crazy project called Design Chicago. We're going to launch it with a big launch party and have it at our studio and launch it on Kickstarter and really put ourselves out there. It was terrifying. And we said we'd raise $125,000 in Kickstarter. And everybody said we weren't going to make it. All the naysayers said, forget about it. Not a chance. It's going to be terrible if you try. Even if you did do it, you never raised the right amount of money. And they were right. We completely blew it. It was the most professionally embarrassing thing I've ever had to go through. It was really, really humiliating. If only because we didn't really understand what we were really asking. We really made a very complicated ask to the public. And by associating it with money and not just straight volunteers, we'd complicated the story. So after many nights of crying myself to sleep, we picked ourselves up and realized this very funny little sort of insight around failure. By failing so epically as we had, we realized that we were completely off the hook. Nobody had any expectations anymore for us. We were free to do whatever the hell we wanted now. Like, who cares? how much worse can it get? We'd already blown it in front of everyone we knew. We're like totally under the radar now. So we said, let's do it anyway. If the needs are still there, if we can still make a meaningful contribution without any funding, we should still do it, right? So we said, okay, let's do this thing. So we told everyone again, we're still doing the project. Again, without those expectations. Freeing, it's incredibly freeing. So what I realize, and I often tell my students, is that success hides learning. When you're successful, you're so busy patting yourself on the back, and everyone else is too, that the lessons that were going right there get swept under the carpet. Whereas if you blow it like we did, the lesson is right staring you in the face. So we've been thankful and also very grateful to be able to do the project without any funding so far. And I'd like to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned from that project, from doing it and doing it doing it anyway, as it were. So 3 lessons. First one, make it a role, not a job. We're asking these people, the volunteers, this public, to help us with the project. And by framing it as a role and not a job, we've disassociated the idea of it being a functional set of tasks, but rather a responsibility, that we'd ask merely people to join in if they wish. But by calling it a role, we think it comes at a slightly higher value. We call this role an urban agent. It's kind of a cool name for something that's incredibly dorky, actually. We were asking people to be researchers, go out into the field and do research for us, but take the responsibility of being an agent, as it were, secret cover. And actually, people started emailing us back, okay, Roger, over and out, Agent 54. They'd sign off as agents. They would keep their identity secret from each other, like, we just made this up, guys. Don't worry, it's okay. So making a title or making a role was very important. Second rule, or second lesson, make positive contributions the norm. What we'd always seen up until then, you see, had been a series of questions asked of the public that allow for complaining. What I mean is, when you look at surveys, there might be an entry box somewhere along the line where it says, how could we do better? Or how would you rate my service out of 5? What am I supposed to do with that? I don't actually know. I think it's unfair to think of the local government actually knowing how to interpret that data into something tangible. That, I think, is really hard. So don't ask these types of questions if you actually want to do something with it. So what we realized is that we have to actually teach how those contributions can be productive. And because we can't meet everyone that we'd love to meet, we had to do a lot of it over the internet. So we started teaching through video how to make these contributions as a researcher, as a designer. And we found it reasonably successful. In fact, one of the great insights we found from our field agents, our urban agents, is that we had somebody go out to tell us that they would use the Cub schedule as a way to determine whether or not to take the train that day. Has anyone been on a train full of drunk Cubs fans? Yeah. That's actually meaningful data if you want to avoid getting thrown up on that day. So we never knew this at CTA. We never thought that that was something that people did, but people are doing this constantly. What we realize is that there's probably millions of people in Chicago that have little nuggets like this about how they navigate the city, these little transit tools, but we never asked them. So how can we turn all those insights into something meaningful? You do it by having an entire public design team. Lastly, the last lesson, give your team a platform. What that means is that when we were planning out, okay, we're going to have all these contributions, what the hell are we going to do with them all? And we realized, okay, we need to actually have a way to do it. So we had to design and build. The only part of money we actually had to spend was hiring a developer to help build an online platform that allowed for all these contributions. We had over 900 from all around the world. We had screenshots, photographs, sketches, text messages. We had all of these contributions on research and design, on how to make and design this app to be better for the public. And we were really completely blown away. But we knew that by designing the platform that you can contribute to, you can actually share what's going on, record what's happening, and celebrate it. People were commenting on each other's contributions as agents. It was amazing. And in fact, one of the things that we started to do, what we realized is that not just contributions online, but we also have to facilitate interaction one-on-one. So we hosted a series of workshops in person in our studio that allowed for people to come in and actually work with us. So we finally got to meet these people. We got to reveal their secret identities. It was really fun. And a lot of people were often asking us, how is it possible that you can take this rowdy group of unwashed masses into designers? Surely they need to be talented, people would ask. And I say the same thing to my students. Talent is just the ability to do something without training. So in that supposed talent gap, all it is missing is just the ability to train someone well enough to be able to contribute. And we realize that that contribution can be huge if with just a small amount of investment in training. So we thought we could do that. We've been fortunate enough that in this process of getting this project off the ground. And then during the process that we took, we've had a lot of recognition from national and international press. And the pinnacle of that was obviously to get a TED Prize last year. We were recognized by the TED community. So we were honored, deeply honored to be part of that 10 winners of last year's City 2.0 award. Now, before I start to pat myself on the back a little more here, we realized I want to remind you that this project is not done. It's far from being done. And in fact, what we've taken as a major criticism to ourselves is that because we took a very internet-based approach, there are so many populations within Chicago that we never met, many under-resourced populations, many geographically that we weren't able to get to. We are northwest on the city along the Blue Line, and we met a lot of people that look just like us. In fact, just like you guys. And there's a lot of people that we never met that don't look like you, frankly. So for us, if we do get funding, and when we do, we commit to going back out into the field and meeting all of those people that we missed. So that's my commitment to you guys. So in conclusion, the 3 lessons from our project. Make it a role, not a job. Make positive contributions to the norm, and give your team a platform. I think when you consider projects that you're about to do in the future, please think of the public design team as being a member that is waiting and dying to help you if you'd only ask. And I think together you'd be amazed at how much we can do. Thank you.